Welcome to the next lecture in Basics of Physical Chemistry. A quick overview of how concentration can be measured for different solutions will be discussed in this part of the lecture. This is just going to be a general overview of the facts that you might have already learned in school. But this is being done so as to make sure that you are able to catch up to some of the important topics that will subsequently follow in the other chemistry courses. When you take a look at the periodic table, in addition to the element, you also have its atomic mass listed above. The first question that comes up is, how is this atomic mass a non-integer number? This question comes up because we have acquainted ourselves with the fact that an atomic mass comes up due to the sum of the mass of the protons and the neutrons that are present in the nucleus. Now the problem that is present is that how can a non-integer number of the sum of protons and neutrons can be present, basically the nucleons. This comes up due to the fact that for a given element, it could have isotopes. Means that it will have the same mass number, but different atomic number that are present. And these elements could be present at different isotopic abundance. So what do we mean by that? For C12, the isotopic abundance is like something like 98.9%, while C13 is about 1.1%. There are also other isotopes that are present for carbon. However, they are present in trace amounts and are also fleeting in their existence. So therefore, we are only going to be talking about the stable isotopes that are present. So if you sit calmly and calculate what is the atomic mass that comes for carbon, you're going to have something like 12 times 0.989 plus 13 times 0.011. So basically these are the percentages converted into the fraction of population that is present. Then you'll realize this will come up to something like 12.0107 grams, which is what is approximated as 12.011 grams for carbon. Now, having gotten ourselves introduced to what is atomic mass, when you're looking at something like oxygen, it's 15.999 grams, so which we write as 16. So the numbers here, for instance, 12.011 grams for carbon, already takes care of the isotopes that are present. And therefore, when you're calculating molecular weight for something like CO2, you're going to do something of this sort. 12.011 times 1 times 15.999 times 2. Then you get what is the molecular weight of carbon dioxide. So now this being introduced, we can also take this concept further to calculate what is the molecular mass of something like sodium carbonate. So sodium atomic mass is 23, carbon is 12, and then oxygen is 16. So you're going to have 46 plus 12, which is 58, plus 48, which is going to be 106 grams per mole. So this is the molecular weight of sodium carbonate. Let's ask ourselves a question that if you are going to dissolve 10.6 grams of Na2CO3 in 1 liter of solution. One has to be careful here. I mean solution. In theory, it should be appropriate amount of solvent such that the volume of the solution goes to 1 liter. So this could be something like, I'm just giving a random number here, 995 ml, assuming that when you add 10.6 gram of the solute to 995 ml of the solvent, you get 1 liter of solution. Although these sound to be a little difficult to understand, in the lab, you'll be using something like a volumetric flask, which has a small gradation here. Meaning that when you end up using the volumetric flask, you will add a given amount of solute in this and then make a solution up to this part. Of course, you will have a lower meniscus that you'll be looking for something like water. Very rarely you have solutions that have an upper meniscus. So once you have this, the volume of 1 liter can be easily achieved in such a case. So let's ask ourselves a question. If you dissolve 10.6 grams of Na2CO3 in 1 liter solution, what is the concentration of Na2CO3? So in order to do this, the first definition that we'll be looking at is molarity. Molarity is defined as the ratio of the number of moles that is present divided by volume of solution in liters. So for instance, we have said we'll be using 10.6 grams of sodium carbonate. So the number of moles is going to be equal to 10.6 divided by 106 gram per mole. You have grams here, so therefore you're going to get 0.1 moles of sodium carbonate that is present. So with that being the premise, we said molarity is given by the ratio of the number of moles to volume of solution in liter. So this is going to be 0.1 molar. One has to be a little careful here in using the number of moles, because in this example, whatever I have taken, you have Na2CO3, that doesn't have any further complications. What do I mean by complications? You could have a certain chemical that is present. For instance, just taking an example here, Na2CO3 dot 6H2O, where this is the water of hydration. So if the salt that you're ending up using actually has other things that come along with it, which is already known, then one has to calculate the molecular weight, factoring this part in. So now, having said this, the next definition that we'll be looking at is molality. Let's ask a question that complicates: why is molarity not enough? Although that is a concentration unit that is quite prevalent, is that the volume is a temperature dependent phenomenon, meaning that as you keep changing temperature, multiple things could happen. Remember, volume is going to be given by mass divided by density. And therefore, density ends up varying as a function of temperature, due to which volume will vary for a given mass. So that complicates measurement of molarity, especially if you're trying to say molarity for a given, say, sodium carbonate, then you got to specify at what temperature you're talking about. In order to alleviate this problem, the next unit came up, which is molality, which is once again defined by the ratio of the number of moles to that of mass of solvent in kilograms. This might be a better way of defining, largely because mass is independent of temperature. And secondly, the difference comes up in what we are trying to talk about, solution versus solvent. In the previous case, one has to be very careful so as to ensure that the volume that is added is carefully matched to whatever you want to have in this volumetric flask. On the other hand, the advantage with molality that you get, you can actually add 1 kilogram of, let's say, H2O to 10.6 grams of Na2CO3. So what does that make? So molality given by small m is going to be 0.1 divided by 1 kg is going to be 0.1 molal. There's an important difference that ends up coming. I did take a hypothetical example where you added 995 ml of water. What you're able to see is that these two concentrations are slightly different, because 1 kg of water at 25 degrees is going to be 1000 ml instead of 995. So therefore, molarity and molality could be subtly different with respect to each other. Then you might ask, why is that we don't use as much of molality in our regular calculations? Is because it once again complicates matters for liquids dissolved in a liquid. For instance, if you are just talking about what is the molarity of ethanol in a solution of ethanol in water, it's far much more clear. Of course, you have to define at what temperature you're talking about. On the other hand, when you go to molality, then one has to be careful about what is the definition of solvent here, in which case either of them could be a solvent. Of course, you got to say molality of ETOH in water, then probably one could define it precisely, but then there are confusions that end up coming. So with these two definitions already in place, let's start to look at some very simple chemical reactions. One of the most common reactions, or one of the reactions that we would have started chemistry with, is a neutralization reaction. When you're adding an acid to a base, in this example, a strong acid to a strong base, you're going to have a neutral salt that precipitates or is in solution, if it's a soluble salt, plus water that is present. In this example, what we are able to see is that one equivalent of HCl and one equivalent of NaOH results in one equivalent of sodium chloride and one equivalent of water that comes up. However, there is a small thing that comes up here. Although this is 1, we could ask what happens with the same thing when you have H2SO4. In this case, you will quickly realize that you're going to talk about Na2SO4 plus 2H2O. Of course, I'm writing 2 and 2 here, assuming you know what is stoichiometry and how to balance equations, chemical equations. If you're not very clear about these concepts, I would encourage you to go back and take a look at all these from your standard textbooks, or we can discuss the same whenever we have time. So this being the case, what you're able to realize is that the same 1 mole, or rather 1 equivalent of HCl only requires 1 equivalent of NaOH. On the other hand, 1 equivalent of sulfuric acid requires 2 equivalents of NaOH. So this becomes a little tricky, meaning that when you're preparing solutions of known concentrations, you have to be careful about how much reacts with how much of the other reagent in order to prepare them carefully. In order to alleviate this issue, definition of normality is more helpful. Normality could be defined in a couple different ways. I'll go with whatever we have started with, number of moles divided by, or rather, divided by volume of solution in liters times number of equivalents. So basically you are able to see this is nothing but molarity. If you already know molarity, the only other thing that you would need to know is what is number of equivalents. The number of equivalents depends upon the kind of reaction that you are looking at. For instance, if you're taking a look at the acid, which is in equilibrium with its corresponding ions, of course, I'm talking about H2O, can be H3O plus and Cl minus. When you're having a situation of this sort, you're able to realize that HCl furnishes 1 equivalent of H plus ions in solution. On the other hand, H2SO4 is going to furnish 2 equivalents of H plus ions. So the number of equivalents in case of an acid or base is defined as the amount of substance that is required to generate 1 mole of H plus ions or quench 1 mole of H plus ions. For instance, if you're talking about NaOH, you're going to have something like Na plus, that is hydrated, plus OH minus ions. So therefore, this is going to end up quenching 1 mole of H plus. So therefore, the equivalence of NaOH is going to be equal to 1. So therefore, this definition helps us in the fact that for H2SO4, the number of equivalents is 2. This indicates that H2SO4 can furnish 2 moles of H plus, and therefore you would require double the amount of NaOH in comparison to the neutralization reaction in HCl, so as to have complete neutralization of the chemicals that you have. So now let's also try to take a quick look at what is the number of equivalents. Number of equivalents could also be defined as the molecular weight in grams divided by its equivalent weight. Once again, these are all definitions that are written back and forth, meaning that the equivalent weight you're talking about for a given chemical is going to be given by molecular weight divided by the number of equivalents. So far what we have done is to just define the number of equivalents for acids and bases. Let's take some other example now. Let's take an example of a redox reaction. Redox reaction is one where you have reduction and oxidation happening simultaneously. One of the classic examples I'm sure you have seen several times in your school and probably even practicals that you might end up doing is the reaction between oxalic acid and potassium permanganate. Oxalic acid is H2C2O4. Potassium permanganate is KMnO4. So H2C2O4 looks like this. It's a good idea to draw the chemical structures because we are going to be talking about oxidation number for each of this. And the way that one could calculate is that for something like proton is +1, oxygen is -2. So therefore, you have a -8 plus 2 with a neutral molecule. So therefore, it's going to be carbon, which there are 2 units of it, has to be +3. In a similar vein, potassium permanganate, K plus is +1, oxygen is -2. So you're going to have manganese ion in or Mn in +7 oxidation state in potassium permanganate. You could always see some examples where it's a little tricky to calculate this way. So it's always a good idea to draw the chemical structure to understand what kind of atoms are directly bonded so as to minimize any mistakes that might end up coming. So the reaction that you will be looking at here is a redox reaction where the oxidation of oxalic acid to carbon dioxide ends up happening. In oxalic acid, as we just saw, carbon is in +3 state. On the other hand, in carbon dioxide is in the +4 state. So therefore, it means that each carbon ends up losing 1 electron to go here. So therefore, something like C2O42 minus becomes CO2 plus 2 electrons. So similarly, we can talk about MnO4 minus. This is KMnO4. And in this case, manganese goes to +2 oxidation state. And therefore, you started at 7, you ended up going to +2. This indicates that MnO4 minus has taken in 5 electrons. We will see from where in a moment. To become Mn +2, oxygen ends up becoming H2O. Since you have 4 oxygens, you should have 4 H2O so as to balance. And immediately you realize that protons aren't balanced. And more importantly, if you take a look at the left-hand side, you have something like a -6 charge that is present. On the right-hand side, you have +2. So basically, you can add 8 protons to the left-hand side so as to make sure you have a +2 charge on either side. So therefore, the charge, the mass and everything, electrons, everything gets balanced here, electronic charge. So let me rewrite this whole equation so that it looks cleaner. C2O42 minus becomes CO2 plus 2 electrons. MnO4 minus plus 8H plus 5 electrons becomes Mn plus 2 plus 4H2O. So if these two are the reactions that are happening, remember all that oxalic acid could furnish is 2 electrons. On the other hand, the manganate requires 5 electrons for it to be happy. So the immediate thing that we end up doing is to multiply the oxalic acid equation by 5 and the manganate reaction by 2. So therefore, what ends up happening is that you have 5 C2O42 minus going to 5 CO2 plus 10 electrons. And then the other reaction is 2 KMnO4 minus plus 16H plus 10 electrons going to 2 Mn2 plus 8H2. Immediately you are able to realize one can cancel the electrons that are present on either side. And therefore the reaction ends up being 5 C2O42 minus plus 2 MnO4 minus plus 16H plus going to 5 CO2 plus 2 Mn plus 2 plus 8H2. So you're having charges on either side. So 5 C2O42 minus will take 10 of the protons that are present. So therefore, this is going to be 5 H2C2O4, which is your oxalic acid, plus 2 KMnO4. I'm just trying to satisfy the negative charge here. And then in this side, you still have 6 H plus that is left out. Yeah. So we'll try to change that as well, giving you 5 CO2 plus 2 Mn plus 2 plus 8H2. Generally, you're not going to have species that are present this way. So we can assume you are adding H2SO4. If you're adding H2SO4, it's going to furnish 2 protons per equivalent of H2SO4. Therefore, 3 H2SO4 gives you 6 H plus. The moment you have something like this also ends up taking care of other things that are present. So it's going to be 2MnSO4, and then one of the MnSO4 that's going to be present is going to be plus K2SO4. So far what you have seen is a redox reaction between oxalic acid and potassium permanganate, and how to go stepwise, and how oxalic acid gives up the electrons and potassium permanganate takes up the electron with other acids involving itself. So in this example, if you have to calculate what is the normality of oxalic acid, then the question comes up is what is the number of equivalents that is present. So the number of equivalents that's going to be present for oxalic acid is going to be determined by the number of electrons it ended up donating. So basically the number of equivalents is going to be 2 for oxalic acid, while it's going to be 5 for potassium permanganate. So therefore, if one has to calculate what is the normality for this reaction for oxalic acid, then one ends up getting the number of moles based on the weight that you ended up measuring for oxalic acid divided by the volume of solution in liters times the number of equivalents, which is going to be 2. On the other hand, for potassium permanganate, it's going to be 5. The reaction that you're trying to perform is what guides the definition of normality. On the other hand, for molarity, that was not the case at all. Which is why chemists end up using definitions based on need. Most often we end up using molarity when the equivalents are very well known or it's a 1:1 equivalent. But on the other hand, when you're having reactions that use different equivalents, for instance, the neutralization reaction between H2SO4 and NaOH, where it's not a 1:1 equivalence, or for that matter, the redox reaction between potassium permanganate and oxalic acid, which in which case one gives up 2 electrons, the other one's 5 electrons, the number of equivalents becomes different in each of the cases. The only other case that has not been discussed so far is what are the equivalents when it comes to, say, salts that are present. So in this case, if you have a univalent salt, the number of equivalents is 1. If you have a bivalent salt, it's going to be half, and trivalent will be 1/3. This is once again coming up because of the fact, for instance, if you're taking FeCl3, FeCl3 would have come up largely because you have Fe3 plus and Cl minus interacting with one another. So the trivalent ends up resulting in 3 Cl minus ions will be present. Therefore, the 1/3 ends up coming. For the bivalent, one can think about something like barium chloride, and univalent can be NaCl. So this wraps up the lecture. Basically, you have been introduced to topics of what is molarity, how one ends up measuring it, and what are the differences of molarity with molality, and finally defining what is normality for neutralization reactions, redox reactions, and for salts. So you will be solving some problems based on this. These are very basic concepts, which I'm sure you are already very well aware of, but these are introduced again so that when we keep using them, you're a little comfortable. Thank you very much, and we'll be meeting in the next lecture.